On his first day as an intern at Ardan Row, every person Desmond Hayes met pulled him aside to deliver the same warning. Stay away from Celeste Ardan. They said she had fired a senior manager in the middle of a board meeting. They said 3 personal assistants had quit within a single year. They said she could end a career with 1 email and never lose a minute of sleep over it. Desmond kept his head down. He made copies, checked spreadsheets, and stayed in his lane. But that night, returning a misfiled folder to the executive floor, he saw her through a half-open door, alone. Her back against the wall, a pen in her hand, and a contract in front of her that she clearly did not want to sign. When she noticed him, she didn't call security. She reached out and caught the sleeve of his jacket. "I hope you won't," she whispered. He didn't know if she meant don't tell anyone what you just saw or don't walk away. Desmond Hayes had spent the better part of 2 years explaining a gap on his resume to people who had never once had to choose between a job and the person they loved most. He'd been a mid-level operations analyst at a logistics firm. Steady work, decent pay, a clear path upward. Then his wife Renee was diagnosed, and none of that mattered anymore. He left without much deliberation. He took his daughter Liana to school in the mornings, sat with Renee through her treatments in the afternoons, and learned to stretch a modest savings account further than he had ever thought possible. When Renee died, Liana was 7. Desmond was 32, and he had been out of the professional world long enough that his skills read as outdated on paper even when they weren't. He applied to 46 positions over 14 months. He made it to final interviews at 11 of them. He was offered none. A career re-entry program run out of a community college in downtown Chicago gave him his next move: 12 weeks of updated training in data analysis, a placement coordinator who actually returned phone calls, and an internship match with a company willing to give second chances to people who had earned their detour. The company was Ardan Row, a financial consulting firm with offices across 9 floors of a glass tower on the north side of the city, a client list that included 4 Fortune 500 companies, and a reputation Desmond did not fully understand until his first morning. He was 35 years old. The other interns were at a glance somewhere between 22 and 24. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody had to. He was assigned to the analytics support team on the 6th floor under a team lead named Tessa Monroe. Tessa was sharp, organized, and moved through the office with the efficiency of someone who had survived several rounds of internal restructuring by making herself useful to whoever was currently in power. She welcomed Desmond with a firm handshake and a tour that ended at the copy machine. "You'll mostly be doing data entry and document prep for the first few weeks," she said. "Standard intern track. Work clean. Don't ask questions above your pay grade and you'll be fine." Desmond nodded. He had made his peace with starting at the bottom. Liana needed stability, and stability required income, and income required him to swallow whatever pride might have otherwise objected to spending his first afternoon reformatting expense tables. The warning started before lunch. A paralegal named Marcus stopped him in the hallway near the elevators. "You're the new intern, right? With Tessa's team." "That's right." Marcus lowered his voice. "You'll hear her name a lot. Celeste Ardan, the CEO." He paused to let the title land. "My advice, don't try to impress her. Don't look at her too long in group settings. And whatever you do, don't let her learn your name." "My name? Your name?" Marcus was already backing away. "Just trust me on this one." 2 more people offered variations of the same guidance before the afternoon was out. The specifics varied. One person mentioned a manager who'd been let go mid-sentence in a board meeting. Another referenced 3 assistants who had resigned within a single calendar year. But the shape of the warning was always the same. Celeste Ardan was dangerous. Not in any way that could be easily explained, but in the way that certain environments become dangerous when the person at the top has stopped tolerating anything less than what they expect. Tessa, when Desmond finally asked, was the most direct. "Don't try to get noticed by her," she said without looking up from her monitor. "Don't try to be helpful in ways that cross departmental lines, and if she ever asks you something directly, keep your answer short and professional, and don't volunteer anything extra." She finally looked at him. "I mean it. She's fired people for less. Desmond said he understood. He turned back to his desk and said nothing more about it. But he noticed things in the quiet way that people notice things when they don't have anyone to perform busyness for. He noticed that the lights on the executive floor were still on at 8 o'clock when the rest of the building had gone mostly dark. He noticed while sorting through a stack of interdepartmental memos that several benefit reduction proposals, cuts to employee health coverage adjustments to the parental leave policy had been approved by the board, but quietly redirected back for further review with a single handwritten note. The signature at the bottom was C. Ardan. He noticed that the woman everyone described as cold was in at least 2 documentable instances the only person in the building looking out for the people least able to look out for themselves. The one person who spoke to him without agenda on that first day was not a fellow intern or a member of his team. It was Elena Ruiz. She appeared at his desk mid-morning carrying a laminated sheet and a small stack of internal forms. She was 58 with reading glasses pushed up into steel gray hair and the calm of someone who had seen enough workplace drama to have stopped being surprised by any of it. "Room scheduling," she said, setting the laminated sheet on his desk. "You'll need to log meeting requests through the internal portal, the one on the intranet, not the shared calendar on the drive. They're not synced." She showed him the form. "Fill out the code in column B before you submit, or it routes to the wrong department and disappears." "Thank you," Desmond said. "I wouldn't have known that." Elena shrugged mildly. "Nobody tells the new people anything useful." She glanced around the floor with an expression that was neither cynicism nor affection, just long familiarity. In this building, people pay more attention to titles than to who's actually doing the work. She said it the way someone might comment on the weather. Observation, not complaint. Desmond thanked her again, and she returned to her own desk across the floor. He filed the room scheduling sheet in his top drawer. He noticed in passing that Elena's bottom drawer had a small combination lock on it. It was the only locked desk drawer on the entire floor. Nobody else seemed to think anything of it. He was reviewing a batch of expense reports late in the afternoon when he found the error. A transposed figure in a summary report flagged for delivery to the executive floor, one that threw off the quarterly projection by roughly $40,000, small enough to miss on a quick read, large enough to matter. Desmond corrected the figure, added a short note explaining the change, and placed the folder back in the outgoing stack without saying anything about it. He didn't want his first day to look like an attempt to make someone else look careless. He just fixed it and moved on. He didn't think about it again until the following evening. He had stayed late to finish a batch of archive prep. The executive floor was quiet when he stepped off the elevator to return a misfiled folder. He was reaching for the document wall outside the operations suite when he saw the light from the main conference room. The door was not fully closed. He heard Preston Vale's voice first, measured almost pleasant, the voice of a man accustomed to having his patience mistaken for generosity. "The board has reviewed the numbers. The offer from Wilmot is reasonable, given the company's current position. All we need is your signature." The offer from Wilmot includes a clause that allows them to terminate 43% of existing staff within 6 months of acquisition. The woman's voice was quieter but steadier. "I'm not signing a document that turns 800 people into a line item. Those are operational decisions that would fall to new management. I know what they are, Preston." Desmond stood very still. Through the gap in the door, he could see a section of the conference table and 2 of the people seated at it. Preston Vale, silver-haired in a suit with the precise posture of a man who rarely sat in any chair that wasn't already positioned in his favor. And across from him, Celeste Ardan. She was not what the warnings had prepared him for. She was contained, yes. Her expression gave nothing away. But what Desmond saw was not coldness. It was the specific stillness of someone who had been in this room in this conversation many times before and had learned that visible emotion was the first thing men like Preston used against you. "If you don't sign by the end of the quarter," Preston said, "the board will move to a vote, and I think you know how that vote goes." The meeting ended shortly after. Chairs moved. People gathered their things. Desmond stepped back from the door, reached for the folder stack, and misjudged the edge. Papers scattered across the floor with a sound that seemed unreasonably loud in the empty hallway. By the time he had gathered most of them, the conference room door had opened fully. Celeste Ardan stood in the doorway. She looked at the papers in his hands. She looked at his face. "How long were you standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to have heard things I wasn't supposed to," Desmond said. He didn't see a point in pretending otherwise. "I'm not going to repeat any of it. I'm an intern. I have a daughter and I need this job. I have no interest in your board politics." She studied him. Then she looked down at the employee badge clipped to his lanyard. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, recognition. You corrected the projection report today, she said. The expense summary. There was a transposition error. I know, I caught it when the folder arrived. She paused. The rest of the team had already signed off on it. Desmond didn't respond to that. He finished collecting the last of the papers and squared the stack against the wall rack. When he turned to leave, she moved slightly. Not blocking his path, but enough that he paused. Her hand caught the edge of his sleeve. The contact was brief, barely intentional. I hope you won't, she said. Her voice was quiet. It was not a demand. It was not quite a request. Desmond didn't ask her to clarify. He wasn't entirely sure, standing there in that dimly lit hallway, whether she meant don't tell anyone or don't leave, or don't be like everyone else who eventually decided it was easier to look away. He nodded once and took the stairs back down to the 6th floor. The next morning, Tessa assigned him to review a batch of older expense files before they were transferred to cold storage. Routine work, the kind of task assigned to interns specifically because it required no judgment and produced no output anyone would ever read. It took Desmond 40 minutes to find the first one. A consulting payment, $340,000 to a firm called Aldrich Advisory Partners. He searched the vendor database. Aldrich had no website, no registered employees, and no address beyond a suite number in a building that, when he mapped it, turned out to be a shipping store in suburban Delaware. He found 6 more like it before lunch. Different names, different amounts, all approved by the same signature. Gordon Pike, Chief Financial Officer. He pulled the quarterly summaries and matched the outflows against the revenue reports. The numbers told a story that had nothing to do with Celeste Ardan's management decisions. He brought his notes to Tessa. She looked at the page for a long moment. Then she looked up at him with an expression that was not anger, but something closer to fear. Delete these notes, she said. Don't save them anywhere. Don't mention this to anyone on the team. I know what it looks like. Someone. Her voice was low. An accountant named Victor asked the same questions 18 months ago. He was let go for a data security violation 2 weeks later. She closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. You have a daughter. Please think about that. Desmond took the folder. He thought about Liana. He thought about the 800 employees who would receive termination notices if Wilmot closed the deal. That afternoon, Celeste called him up to the executive floor. She knew about the payments. She had suspected for months that money was being moved out of the company through fraudulent vendor accounts. But Gordon controlled the financial reporting system, which meant every trail she tried to follow looped back through him. You're the only person in this building, she said carefully, whose access to those files nobody will question. You're an intern processing archive transfers. You're not a threat to anyone. Until I am, Desmond said. Yes, she said. Until you are. She didn't minimize that. He respected her for it. What are you asking me to do? Keep looking, she said. Document what you find and tell no one else. He thought about Tessa's face when she handed the folder back to him. He thought about Elena's comment about who actually did the work in this building. He thought about a man named Victor he had never met who had asked the same questions and paid for it. Then he said yes. He worked in pieces. During lunch breaks, he spread printouts across the small table in the 6th floor break room and cross-referenced invoice numbers against vendor registration records he pulled from public business databases on his phone. In the evenings before he left the building, he photographed the room scheduling board outside the main conference suite, something he'd started doing as part of an intern task, compiling a weekly facilities report. Nobody ever read. He saved the images to a personal cloud folder and thought nothing more of them at the time. The pattern he was assembling was not complicated once you knew what to look for. The fraudulent consulting firms had all been paid within the same 2-week window each quarter. The payments routed through a subsidiary account that Gordon had restructured 18 months ago, shortly after the board first began discussing the Wilmot acquisition. The amounts were large enough to distort the balance sheet, but small enough individually to avoid automatic audit flags. Someone had thought about this carefully. The problem was that Desmond had no access to the consolidated financial records that would let him trace where the money actually went after it left Ardan Row's accounts. He had fragments. He did not yet have a story. What he did have within 2 weeks was a reputation he hadn't asked for. The other interns had noticed his trips to the executive floor. The visits were not frequent. Celeste was careful about that. But in an office where people tracked proximity to power with vigilance even twice in 10 days was enough. The theories circulated without much subtlety. One version held that he was angling for a permanent position by making himself useful to the CEO in ways that bypassed the standard evaluation process. Another, which he overheard in the elevator, suggested Celeste kept him around because his presence helped the company's diversity optics during a period of external scrutiny. He let it go. He had learned long before Ardan Row that other people's theories about your motivations were mostly a reflection of what they themselves would have done in your position. Tessa was more direct. "People are talking," she said on a Thursday afternoon when the floor had mostly cleared out, "and not in ways that are good for you." "I know." She waited until he looked up from his monitor. "I'm not saying this to be unkind. I've watched people try to attach themselves to Celeste before. Smart people, people with more resources than you currently have. They all ended up in the same place." She folded her hands on the desk. "You have a daughter. Whatever you think you're building up there, it's not worth what it's going to cost you." She meant it. He could see that she did. Tessa Monroe was not a cruel person. She was someone who had learned to survive in a specific environment by accepting certain things as fixed, and she was trying in the only way she knew to pass that lesson on. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. She nodded and returned to her work. Neither of them said anything more about it. The following week, Preston Vale called him in. The deputy chairman's office was on the 8th floor, 3 levels above Desmond's team, and noticeably quieter. Preston gestured to the chair across from his desk with the easy authority of a man who had never once doubted that the chair would be taken. "Desmond," he said as if they were old acquaintances, "I wanted to check in personally. A re-entry candidate's single-father career gap, the whole story that matters to this organization." He smiled in the way that people smile when the smile is doing a job. "How are you finding things so far?" "Fine," Desmond said. "The work is straightforward." "Good. Good." Preston set down his pen. "I'll be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty. There are some concerns on my end about how your time has been allocated. The executive floor visits, the extended access to certain records." He let that sit for a moment. "I want to make sure you're not being put in a difficult position by anyone above your level." "I'm not. Because if someone were using your position as an intern, your lower profile to pull information that would normally require senior clearance, that would put you in a genuinely dangerous spot. Legally." Preston's voice remained pleasant. "On the other hand, if you came to me directly with concerns about what you might have seen or heard, I could make sure you were protected and that a role opened up for you here that reflected your actual abilities." He paused. "Permanently. With a salary appropriate to someone of your background." Desmond looked at the desk between them. "I appreciate the concern," he said. "I'm just doing archive transfers. There's nothing to report." Preston held the smile for another beat, then let it go. The following morning, Desmond's access card was quietly downgraded. His key card now opened the lobby, the 6th floor, and the parking structure. Nothing above the 7th floor registered when he swiped. No alert was sent. No explanation was given. It was the kind of move that communicated its message precisely because it required no words. He was also reassigned. His new duties had nothing to do with data. Managing meeting room bookings, restocking supply closets, photocopying documents for the administrative pool. Preston had moved him out of any position where he might stumble across something useful. What Preston had apparently not considered was the document storage room on the 3rd floor. It was Desmond's job now to sort and log physical records before they were transferred to off-site archiving. He spent 4 days in a windowless room the size of a large closet working through boxes of paper contracts, vendor agreements, and internal correspondence that had never been digitized. By the end of the 2nd day, he understood why the paper trail was older than Gordon's restructuring of the accounts. It went back further. To an earlier version of the vendor scheme, smaller in scale, established by someone who had the authority to approve external contracts without board sign-off. The signature on those early documents was not Gordon's. It was Preston's. Gordon had not designed the scheme. He had inherited it, expanded it, and been given enough of a share to ensure his silence. The whole arrangement had been built by the man now presenting himself as the company's responsible adult. Desmond photographed every page that mattered and said nothing to anyone. The moments that shifted things between him and Celeste did not happen in the conference room. They happened in the margins, in the pauses between what needed to be said and what ended up being said instead. The first was a Tuesday evening nearly 3 weeks in. Desmond was still at his desk at 7 when Celeste passed through the corridor on her way back from a board pre-call. She stopped when she saw the light on. "You're still here." A few more minutes. She leaned against the doorframe without coming in fully. A text notification had just lit up his phone screen. He'd smiled at it before he could catch himself. "Who is that?" she asked. He turned the phone so she could see. Liana had sent Dad, "Do they have free food at your job? Because Jessica's dad works somewhere rich. People work and she says they have a whole kitchen." Celeste read it once, then again. Something happened in her expression, not quite a smile and not quite something else, more like a wall coming down a few inches. "Do we have a kitchen?" she asked. "You have one on 9. I've seen it from the elevator." "Go home," she said. "Take food from the kitchen on 9. Tell Liana yes. I can't just, I run this company." "You can." She had already turned back toward the executive suite. "Take enough for 2. He did. And Liana, when he got home, declared it the best dinner they'd had since her birthday. The second moment came on a night when the data was going badly, and neither of them had much patience left for careful distance. They had been reviewing a set of transaction logs for over an hour when Desmond put down his pen and said without particularly planning to, "Why don't you just tell them?" Celeste looked up. "Tell who what?" "The staff. When you make a decision, they don't understand the benefit redirections the budget holds. Why not explain it to them? Half the things they think about you are based on silence." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "The last time I explained a decision directly to someone on my senior team," she said. Finally, that explanation was in Preston's office within 48 hours. Reframed, stripped of context, used as evidence that I was emotionally reactive. She looked back at the papers in front of her. "I'm not cold. I learned that openness in this particular environment is something people collect and use against you." Desmond said nothing. He looked at the woman across the table, not the CEO, not the story the building had built around her, and saw someone who had been burned enough times to have decided that keeping her distance was the only way to keep anything at all. He went back to the transaction logs. The third moment was quieter than the other two. Celeste asked him a few nights later why he was still doing this, not why he had said yes in the beginning. She understood that answer. But why now after the reassignment? After Tessa's warnings, after Preston's barely veiled offer? He thought about how to answer honestly without making it about her. "After my wife died," he said, "I spent a long time thinking about the decisions I'd made, whether I'd made the right ones. And the thing I kept coming back to was that I never regretted the things I did, even when they went badly. The things that stayed with me were the ones where I knew something was wrong and I found a reason not to act." He looked at the window and the city below it. "I'm not doing this to prove anything. I'm doing it because I know what it feels like to have people with more power than you decide your future without your consent. I'm not going to watch that happen to 800 people because it's inconvenient for me to stop it." Celeste did not try to talk him out of continuing after that. The all-staff meeting was called with 3 days' notice and no stated agenda, which meant everyone understood that something significant was about to occur. The main conference space on the 4th floor was full when Preston took the podium. He didn't use notes. He spoke for 11 minutes about fiscal responsibility, shareholder obligations, and the duty of leadership to make difficult decisions in difficult times. He cited the company's declining margins. He referenced the Wilmot offer as a necessary path forward that responsible stewardship demanded they consider seriously. And then, with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this part more carefully than the rest, he turned to Celeste. He said the numbers didn't lie. He said the board had identified a pattern of unilateral decision-making that had cost the company the confidence of its major investors. He said there were questions about how certain internal reviews had been conducted, about who had been given access to sensitive data, and about the nature of certain relationships that had developed outside of normal professional channels. His eyes moved briefly to the back of the room. Every head in the conference space followed. Desmond sat in the 3rd row from the back with his visitor's badge, the only credential he was now permitted to use in the building, and felt the full weight of 200 people looking at him at the same moment. Preston let the silence hold for exactly the right length of time. "We have an intern," he said, "who has been given access to senior financial records, who has been meeting privately with our CEO outside of documented work hours, and whose account has been used to pull restricted client data." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm going to ask that individual to stand up and tell this room in his own words what he was asked to do and by whom." No one moved. Desmond stood up. He didn't do it because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. He did it because sitting down felt like the same choice he had refused to make every night for the past 3 weeks. He said clearly enough that the people in the back could hear, "I've been reviewing expense documentation as part of my archive assignment. What I found were payments totaling over $4 million distributed across 11 vendor accounts, none of which have verifiable business operations." He kept his eyes on the room, not on Preston. All of those payments were approved by the CFO. None of them appear in the consolidated reports the board has been using to assess the company's financial position. The room was very quiet. The quarterly losses that have been used to justify this acquisition, Desmond continued, are not the result of any decision made by this company's CEO. Preston recovered quickly. He called the claims unverified and irresponsible. He said the intern had been fed incomplete data by someone with an agenda. He said there would be consequences for anyone who used a company platform to defame senior leadership. The meeting ended without a vote, but something had shifted. Desmond could see it in the way people filed out, not the usual post-meeting drift, but something slower, more thoughtful. People asking questions under their breath, people looking at Gordon Pike's empty chair. Tessa had not spoken. She had sat 2 rows ahead of Desmond through the entire meeting, her eyes fixed on the table, her hands folded in her lap. When it was over, she did not look at him. But she did not look at Preston either. She walked out alone, and for the first time, the weight of her own silence felt different to her than it ever had before. The security alert came through the following morning at 9:47. Desmond was called into Human Resources and informed that his user account had been flagged for transmitting restricted client files to an external email address. The timestamp on the transmission was from the previous evening, 11:43 at night. His visitor's badge was collected at the front desk. He was escorted off the premises by a member of the security team who looked uncomfortable about it and said nothing. Gordon's office released a statement to the board within the hour. The statement included a summary of the transmitted files, a log of Desmond's recent access history, and a formal recommendation that the company pursue legal action for data theft. The re-entry program called him that afternoon. His scholarship would be suspended pending the outcome of any disciplinary or legal proceeding. Without it, he couldn't complete his certification. Without his certification, the placement pathway closed. He sat in his car in the parking garage of his apartment building for a long time after that call. He thought about Liana's school fees, about the lease renewal he'd signed 2 months ago, based on a projected income that no longer existed, about the 46 applications and the 14 months before Ardan Row, and the particular exhaustion of starting over when starting over is the only option you have left. That same afternoon, Elena's resignation notice hit the human resources system. She submitted it quietly, without a farewell email, without stopping to say goodbye to anyone on the floor. Nobody went to check whether her desk drawer was still locked. Elena contacted him that evening through a personal email address. She asked if they could meet somewhere that was not the office. They met at a diner 6 blocks from the building. Elena arrived with her coat still on and a paper bag she set on the table between them without explanation. "I need to tell you something," she said, "that I should have told someone a long time ago." She explained it without softening it. 18 months ago, Gordon had brought her into a process she didn't fully understand. Logging invoices for vendors she'd never heard of, processing payments through an account she'd been told was a standard operations fund. She was close to her retirement date. She had nodded and done what she was asked. When the scale of it became clear to her, she had not gone to anyone. She had been too afraid of losing the pension she had spent 30 years building. She had instead started making copies, every invoice, every approval memo with Gordon's signature, every routing instruction. That was what was in the locked drawer. That was what was in the bag. "They're not in the system," she said. "I kept physical copies at home." Desmond looked at the bag without touching it. "Elena, I know." She met his eyes. "I know what I did. I know what it cost." She looked at the bag, "but I didn't throw them away." He understood the math of a person who has spent 30 years building something they can't afford to lose. He didn't absolve her, and he didn't judge her. "I just need one thing from you," he said. "What?" "Don't destroy them." She nodded. She kept the bag on the table. She did not take it back. The vote to remove Celeste as CEO was moved up by 8 days. The notice went out on a Friday afternoon. Preston also submitted to the board's legal team a set of emails appearing to show Celeste directing Desmond to extract specific data sets and forward them to a private server. The emails were fabricated. 2 of them were time-stamped on a day when Celeste had been at a documented off-site client meeting in another city. But fabricated evidence submitted correctly can hold long enough. Celeste was placed on administrative leave pending the formal vote. Desmond received a notice from the company's legal department. He was being sued for data theft, breach of contract, and tortious interference. He told Liana that night that there were some problems at work. She was 10, and she knew he was leaving something out. But she let it go until they were watching television, and she curled against him on the couch and said, "Is it because of the lady at your job?" "The boss one." "Partly," he said. Everyone at your job said she was scary. Is she actually? He thought about the kitchen on the 9th floor, about the handwritten note redirecting the benefit cuts, about the woman who had stayed in a building full of people who had already decided who she was and had kept showing up anyway. No, he said. She's not. Liana considered this. Okay, she said, which was what she said when she believed him, but wasn't done thinking about it. The next morning, Celeste called him to a coffee shop 3 blocks from the tower. She arrived before him. She had a folder. Inside was a letter on company letterhead pre-signed stating that Desmond Hayes had acted solely at the direction of the CEO, that all data access had been authorized by her office, and that any legal liability arising from his actions should be directed to her personally. Sign the acknowledgement on the back, she said. It releases you from the civil claim. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. And you, he said, that's not your problem to solve. Celeste, Desmond. Her voice was controlled in the way it always was, but something underneath it was not. You are a father. You are not permitted to lose everything because of a fight that was mine before you ever walked through that building's front door. I didn't stay because of you, he said. She looked at him steadily. I know that. Then you know I'm not signing this. He slid the folder back across the table. He looked through the window at the building down the street, at the lit windows on the 6th floor, at the people moving behind the glass. When does the vote happen? He asked. Thursday, 4 days. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. He didn't touch the folder again. That evening, Tessa Monroe sat alone in her apartment, looking at a document she had kept in a personal folder for 3 years. A list of names, dates, and outcomes compiled during a period when she'd been responsible for internal human resources transfers. 11 employees, all flagged for asking the wrong questions, all quietly moved or removed within months. She had saved it because some part of her even then had known. She opened her laptop and typed a short message to Desmond's personal address. She did not attach the document yet. She just wrote, I think I have something. I'm not sure it matters. Tell me if it does. 3 floors above her apartment, Preston Vale was preparing remarks for a board vote he believed he had already won. He had not yet thought about the room scheduling logs. Desmond found it at the bottom of his bag on a Wednesday morning while looking for a phone charger. The laminated room scheduling sheet Elena had given him on his first day, the one he had tucked into his top drawer and later swept into his bag without thinking about it when security walked him out. He almost set it aside. Then he looked at it. The sheet listed every meeting room booking for a 4-week period. He had looked at this document before in a different context with different questions. Now he looked at it with the 11 vendor names he had memorized from the storage room on the 3rd floor sitting at the front of his mind. Aldrich Advisory Partners, Cornerstone Meridian, Vantage Point Consulting Group. He went through the sheet line by line. Every one of them had booked rooms at Ardan Row. Conference rooms, breakout spaces, 1 booking for the executive dining suite. Dates spread across 14 months' hours logged in the facility system as billable external client meetings. There were no visitors registered at the front desk on any of those dates. He knew because logging visitor credentials was something interns did, and he had done it enough times to know what the records looked like. Someone had used the room booking system to create a paper trail of meetings that never occurred, generating documentation that made the consulting relationships appear operational. The person who had made every single one of those bookings was listed in the system by their employee ID. He matched the ID to the internal directory. It belonged to Gordon's executive assistant. Desmond then pulled up every photograph he had taken of the room scheduling board during his weeks on facilities duty. The photographs were time-stamped, geotagged, and stored in a personal cloud folder, not a company account. Gordon had not been able to touch them. In the background of one photograph, a storage reference code was visible on a filing cabinet behind the schedule. He had seen that code in the 3rd floor storage room. It corresponded to a physical archive cabinet housing pre-digitization records that predated Gordon's restructuring. Records not accessible through any electronic system. He called Elena. She picked up on the 2nd ring. The bag, he said. Are you somewhere safe? I'm at my sister's, she said. I have everything. I need you to meet me tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have, including anything with Preston's name on it. A pause. The vote is tomorrow afternoon. I know. Another pause longer. He did not rush it. My pension, she said, not as an objection, more like she was setting it down somewhere so she could move without it for a moment. I know, he said. 3 decades, she said. Do you understand what that is? Yes. The line was quiet. Then she said, there's a diner on Harlow, 6 blocks east of the building. I'll be there at 8. He called Tessa an hour before he was due to meet Elena. The document you mentioned, he said. The names and dates. 11 people, she said, over 3 years. All of them flagged for asking questions about expenses or vendor contracts. All of them transferred or terminated within 90 days. That's a pattern of suppression. Yes. Her voice was flat in the way voices get when a person has been sitting with a difficult truth for a while. I knew that when I saved it. Will you bring it tomorrow? She was quiet. Tessa, he said. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to bring a document that already exists, that you already kept to a meeting where it might prevent 800 people from losing their jobs. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But you'll have done the thing anyway. She arrived at the diner at 8:15. Elena was already there. The three of them sat in a corner booth and Desmond laid out what he had across the table. The photographs, the laminated schedule sheet, the storage reference code, a timeline he had reconstructed from everything he'd gathered over the past 6 weeks. Elena added the physical documents from her bag. Invoices with routing stamps, approval memos with Gordon's signature, and at the bottom of the stack, 3 older documents with a different signature. Preston Vale's name on vendor authorization forms dated 4 years before Gordon had joined the scheme. Tessa set down her folder last. 11 names, 11 timelines, clean dated factual. Is this enough? Elena asked. Desmond looked at the table. It's enough to stop the vote, he said. Whether it's enough to finish it is someone else's job. He looked at them both. We need a lawyer in that room. The re-entry program's legal advisor had given Desmond her direct number 3 months ago at orientation as part of a standard whistleblower resource packet he had filed in a drawer and forgotten about. He called her at 8:45. She was in her car by 9. The vote was scheduled for 2 o'clock on the 14th floor. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the building and looked out over the city with the particular authority of a space designed to remind everyone inside it of how far they were from the ground. The table seated 22. 18 members of the board were present. Celeste sat at the far end, separated from the main body of the meeting by a procedural distinction. She could observe. She could speak once, but she could not vote. Preston opened the session by thanking everyone for their time. He spoke about the Wilmot offer, the timeline, the projected recovery for shareholders. He spoke about leadership accountability and the cost of continued uncertainty. When he opened the floor for final remarks before the vote, Celeste stood. She did not use notes. She walked the board through the 4 years she had been CEO, the decisions she had made, the rationale behind them, and what had actually happened to the company's core business as a result. She showed the transfers from her own account, documented time-stamped audited money she had used to preserve employee benefits the board had voted to cut. Preston let her finish. Then he said with the patience of a man who has already won admirable, "But sentiment is not a financial strategy, and the board's obligation is to its shareholders." He called for the vote. The door opened. Desmond came in first, then Elena with the paper bag held against her chest, then Tessa with her folder, then the legal advisor carrying a briefcase, and the quiet authority of someone who had spent a career in rooms where she wasn't entirely welcome. Preston looked at them with the expression of a man recalculating a problem he thought he had already solved. "This is a closed session," he said. A whistleblower protection filing was submitted to the State Attorney General's office at 11:15 this morning, the legal advisor said. Under statute, any material evidence filed in conjunction with that complaint is admissible in proceedings that have a direct bearing on the conduct described. This qualifies. Elena set the paper bag on the end of the table. She looked at the board members she had been making coffee and reserving rooms for over 3 decades. And she began to speak. She was methodical. She had organized the documents herself the night before in the order that told the story most clearly. Invoice by invoice, signature by signature, routing instruction by routing instruction. When she finished, she sat down. Desmond stepped forward. He walked the board through the connection, the room bookings, the vendor names, the absence of visitor records, and the storage reference that led to the physical archive, with Preston's own signature establishing the original scheme 4 years before Gordon had been brought in to scale it. Then he showed them the transmission log, the data that had allegedly been sent from his account to an external server. He showed them the timestamp, 11:43 at night. Then he showed them his access card deactivation record. His key card had been downgraded to restricted access at 2:17 that same afternoon, more than 9 hours before the transmission occurred. A card locked out of every system above the 7th floor could not have been used to access, retrieve, or transmit senior financial records from the executive database. Then he showed them the camera footage pulled that morning from the building management company, which was not under Gordon's control, of Gordon's assistant using a terminal in the intern workspace at 11:31 at night on the same evening. Tessa laid her document on the table last. 11 employees, she said, over 36 months, each one flagged internally for raising concerns about vendor payments or expense discrepancies. Each one transferred or terminated within 90 days. She kept her voice even. This is not a coincidence. This is a system. The room was very quiet. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s who had said nothing since the session opened, looked at Preston Vale and asked him without raising her voice whether he would like to respond. Preston did not respond. The vote did not happen that afternoon. The session was suspended pending emergency review. Preston and Gordon were placed on immediate administrative leave. The evidence package was transferred to the State Attorney General's office and within 10 days to federal investigators. The charges when they came were substantial. Securities fraud, wire fraud, falsification of business records, obstruction, witness intimidation. The kind of list that takes years to fully resolve and does not resolve quietly. Celeste was reinstated as CEO by a board vote of 16-0 2 days after the session was suspended. It was unanimous. The company's legal team withdrew the civil complaint against Desmond Hayes the following morning. His record with the re-entry program was restored. The program coordinator called him personally and offered him an expedited path to a management track placement citing exceptional circumstances. He thanked her and declined. "I want to be evaluated the same way everyone else is," he said. "If I qualify for something, I want to qualify for it." She paused. Then she said she respected that. After a standard evaluation process, Desmond was offered a position as a junior risk analyst at Ardan Row. The offer came from the hiring team, not from the CEO's office. The committee noted in their written assessment that his archive work had identified a structural gap in the company's vendor verification process that the entire finance department had missed. He accepted the position. Elena returned to the office on a Monday to find a letter waiting for her. Her pension was secured in full. She had also been offered a newly created advisory role supporting a whistleblower protection initiative that Celeste had begun building during the weeks she'd spent on administrative leave. Elena read the letter twice, refolded it, and put it in the unlocked top drawer of her desk. She left the bottom drawer locked. Old habit. She saw no reason to change it. Tessa was not reprimanded and not celebrated. Celeste met with her privately for 40 minutes in the third week after the reinstatement. What they said to each other was not shared with anyone. What came afterward was that Tessa requested a transfer to the newly formed Internal Compliance Review Committee, a body with actual authority designed to ensure that what had happened at Ardan Row could not happen again without someone saying so. She wasn't sure she was ready for it. She took the position anyway. 6 months later, Desmond completed his certification, passed his evaluations, and officially joined Ardan Row. The welcome reception for the new cohort was held on the 4th floor, the same space where Preston had stood at a podium and pointed to the back of the room. The chairs were arranged differently now, and the light was better, and the people who moved through it seemed less guarded than Desmond remembered. Liana came. She wore the blazer she had asked for as a birthday present because she had explained that she was almost 11, and almost 11 was when you started needing a blazer. She stood beside her father and looked at the building around her with the frank appraisal of a child who is measuring a place against the story she has been told about it. She knew the full version, or as much of it as was appropriate for someone who was almost 11. She knew her father had started at the bottom and been told to stay there. She knew he hadn't. Celeste arrived without announcement. She did not go to the front of the room. She moved along the perimeter, spoke briefly with Elena near the coffee station, and then found the row of chairs set aside for family and guests and sat down. Liana looked at her. Celeste looked back. "You're the CEO," Liana said. "I am. Everyone at my dad's job said you were scary." Celeste considered this. What do they say now? Liana looked at her father across the room, talking with two colleagues, relaxed in a way she had not seen him be in a professional setting before, like the space fit him instead of the other way around. "He doesn't really talk about you like a boss anymore," Liana said, with the accuracy of someone who had not yet learned to soften observations. "He just talks about you like a person." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "I'll take that," she said. After the reception, Desmond found her in the conference room on the executive floor. The one with the half-open door, the one where everything had started. She was standing at the window looking at the city. "Do you remember what they told you?" she asked when she heard him come in. "On your first day. Don't let you learn my name. And yet, And yet he agreed. She turned from the window. The city was dark behind her, and the room was lit from the hallway, and she looked in that light like someone who had stopped performing composure and found something calmer underneath it. "The night I said it," she said. "In the hallway. I hope you won't. I wasn't only talking about the secret. I know. I know, Celeste." She looked at him steadily. "Everyone who stayed eventually left, not because I drove them away, because it was easier to believe the version of me the building had decided on." She paused. "You never seemed to believe it. The version they were describing didn't match the person I kept seeing." She took a step toward him, not closing the distance entirely, just enough. "I hope you won't leave," she said quietly, directly. No more ambiguity. Desmond reached out and took her hand. He didn't make a promise that extended further than the truth of the moment, because he had learned with some difficulty that the only promises worth making were the ones you could actually keep. "I'm still here," he said. Liana was waiting in the hallway outside, blazer on patient, in the way she had learned to be patient, when the door opened and her father came out alongside the woman who was not scary and not just a boss. Liana looked at the two of them and decided privately that her father had made good decisions. She had always suspected he would. She took his hand, and the three of them walked to the elevator, and the building hummed around them with all of its ordinary life. 800 people's ordinary lives continuing as it turned out exactly as they should. Desmond had started at the bottom. He had a gap on his resume, a daughter counting on him, and a building full of people telling him to keep his head down. He didn't rescue anyone with power or connections. He just noticed what others walked past, chose honesty when silence would have been safer, and refused to leave when leaving would have been easier. No position is too low for an honest person to make a difference. And sometimes the people everyone warns you to avoid are the ones who most need someone to simply see them clearly.